Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're gonna talk about more spoilers for from Shadows of the Galaxy. So, as you know, I still haven't played with any of those cards, so obviously this is just my first impression after reading the card and thinking about them a little bit. And obviously, all those cards are thoughts for in the perspective of a competitive deck. How competitive do I think those cards are? First, we got Scanning Officer. Scanning Officer is interesting because it does basically destroy resources that are with a smuggle keyword, but then they get replaced by other resources from the top of the deck. But keep in mind that when those resources are being replaced by resources from the top of the deck, those resources come into play exhausted. That means that if you manage to find smuggle cards that are resources that have the smuggle keyword, you are effectively, of course, removing that smuggle card out of the game, but you're also replacing it by a card that comes into play exhausted. So you are essentially exhausting cards. So I think this card is honestly pretty good. If Smuggle ends up seeing a lot of play, I can see this card being a decent sideboard card. Because here's you play this card either on turn 1 or turn 2 with the initiative. Even if you find just one Smuggle card, and you happen to be exhausting an opponent resource, I think that's quite valuable because you can effectively blank potentially the entire turn of your opponent. So in my opinion, the ability to exhaust enemy resource is more powerful than the ability to remove smuggle card out of the game, even though both effects go hand to hand. It's also single aspect green, and it's also imperial and official, which are pretty powerful traits. So I think this card is a decent sideboard option versus smuggle decks if there's going to be some. Hard to tell whether or not smuggle will see a lot of play in the set. We've seen a couple of strong smuggle cards, but not that many of them are really meant for constructed. It feels like. So we'll see how it goes. For now, I'll give it a 4 out of 10 because obviously it is very specialized. And even if you happen to be playing this card against the right decks, you're still gonna have to time this card and to play it at the right moment for it to really be effective. Moving on, we got Reckless Gunslinger. So this card is not super exciting. A 2-1 for 1 is not exactly what you are looking for, but it has an immediate impact on the game, and it has a smuggle, and the smuggle cost is not too expensive. So I think this card is playable. Like if ever like a swarm aggro deck ends up basically being played, I think this card has a little bit of potential. Having a one drop that has so just like for Spectral Soldier, I think being a 2-1 for 1 or 2-2 for 1 doesn't really make a big difference. And just like for Spectral Soldiers, the immediate impact and having to be able to deal damage right as it gets played is quite valuable. Spectral Soldiers does have other asset. It is heroic, which works with 4 cause I believe in. It also the effect is, but even though it is more situational, it's far more powerful potentially because disabling like um, a sentinel unit is pretty big. But this card has smuggle, which is something that can be useful in an aggro deck. So I'm not thrilled about this card, but I think it is playable, so I give it a 5 out of 10. Next we got Warbird Stowaway. And this guy is basically a 4-3 for 3 whenever, but only when you have the initiative. Otherwise, it's 2-3, and then he has smuggle 4. So I think this card is pretty terrible. I don't understand why you would want to play a conditional 4-3 for 3 whenever you can just play a 4-3 for 3 like Swoop Racer. And even Swoop Racer as a 4-3 for 3 doesn't really see any play, or really is a very niche card that sees very little play. So I can't imagine a 4-3 for 3 seeing any more play, especially when this one is locked behind a double aspect requirement like green and black. It does have the smuggle, and the smuggle cost is relatively cheap because it's only usually smuggle cards cost 2 more resources than the normal price. This one only costs 1, but I don't think it's enough to save the card. I rate this card a 1 out of 10, and I could just give 1 point for the discounted smuggle cost. Next we got Harm to the Teeth. And this card is, I find it's difficult to imagine if how this card can see play in constructed. Uh, basically +2 attack only for 2 resources is pretty abysmal in my opinion. Um, you have card that give +2/+2 for 2 very easily. It's kind of like the standard. So this one doesn't give the +2 defense, which in my opinion is a very big deal. The on-attack ability is very situational because first of all you need the unit that gets equipped to survive to be able to attack, and then once the attack happens, you need to have another friendly unit that is unexhausted that you can buff, and once again that's not going to get killed. So that is all. This is a very steep condition to meet. Some people think about this card maybe in Leia that can action cheat and play with attack with multiple units, but you still gotta play the card first and then play the other card. So it's a tall order to make everything happen. It does have smuggle, but the smuggle is relatively expensive. Comes at 4, so I'm not excited about this card. I give it a 2 out of 10. Moving on, we got Zor Bliss. So a lot of people were excited about this card, and I honestly don't really understand why. In my opinion, if you are something that costs 5 or more and you don't have an immediate impact on the game, you need to be really good to justify your price, and I don't think Zor Bliss has any of that. She has decent stat for sure, 4/7 for 5, but our on attack ability is relatively weak. It's okay, it's not amazing, and she has no immediate impact on the game. So basically, she doesn't really do enough for a card that comes into play at 5 and doesn't have immediate impact on the game. Even with Energy Conversion Lab, the 4 attack is still not super impressive compared to the other things you can do at this stage of the game. She does have a discounted smuggle cost at 6, which is kind of neat, but I still believe that for 6 she's not very impressive at all. So to me, I rate this card a 4 out of 10. Uh, and I think what saves the card is the decent stats, but even then I don't imagine this is going to see much play. I've been a little bit generous with the rating, maybe it's a 3 out of 10. Next we got the Finalizer, which is the second legendary that we've seen. So finally we see some legendary and obviously every legendary carries a heavy weight because we know that any legendary that sees any amount of play is going to be quite valuable and quite expensive. But luckily or unluckily, depending on your preferences, Finalizer is not one of those cards. I think this card is fairly weak. I think this card is basically kind of a way worse Devastator. I don't understand situations in which you would want this card over a Devastator. Like there's very few cases in which you would prefer this card over a Devastator. Even this card, if this card costs 10, I would still prefer Devastator. That's how bad I think this card is. And the fact that it costs 11 is really outrageously expensive. Like, you gotta imagine that every resources at this point really matters because you got to basically spend an extra card to put this card into play. Because usually you do not really resource beyond 10 unless you're really playing in some particular situations. So having to resource up to 11 just to play that card doesn't seem worth it. So why I'm not a big fan of that card? Well, simply because if you compare to Devastator, Devastator um, gets Sentinel, which is a very big deal because it allows you to stabilize the ground arena. And on top of this, it has an ability that is conditional that can kill on any arena. So here, basically, the baseline with this card is that you're gonna put it to play. You're gonna capture an enemy non-leader unit in the same arena. So cannot kill leaders. Um, it only captures, meaning that if the finalizer gets killed later on, which is very possible, the unit will be freed and come back into play. While Devastator kills units on any arena and kills units almost no matter how big they are. I mean, it deals 10 damage. There's very few units that can resist a 10 damage attack. Um, and you can choose in which arena it's happening, and there's no the unit is killed permanently. And once again, it does have Sentinel. So Finalizer, of course, you can do this with multiple units, but the situation in which you would have multiple friendly units to capture with, as well as opening unit on the same arena on the other side, it's very situational, very generally speaking, when you reach that stage of the game, the board is going to be relatively empty. You don't. Star Wars Unlimited is not a game in which units accumulate to create those massive board like you can find in Magic the Gathering, And in that kind of situation, Finalizer could be very powerful. But Star Wars Unlimited is not that kind of game. In Star Wars Limited, units are constantly trading with one another, and as the game goes longer and people hands start to deplete, usually boards remain relatively empty throughout the later stage of the game, which means that I don't really see situation in which the ability of Finalizer would be very powerful. So in my opinion, Devastator is just even once again, even if this card costs 10, I would still prefer Devastator. So I give this card a 2 out of 10. I don't see situation in which I would want to play this card. Yes, you can play it with Galactic Ambition, but I think this unit working with Galactic Ambition has the exact same problem as Devastator. You're taking too much damage, and it's a 2-card combo that does cards advantage. So it's just and once again, even if you wanted to go for that combo, I still would prefer to play Devastator over this card. Next, we got Palpatine's Return, which is a card that makes me extremely excited. I really love those kind of reanimator effects. This allows you to play a unit from your discard pile that costs 6 or less, and if it's a force unit, it's a card that costs 8 or less. So basically, this card is what we call recursion, that allows you to grab units from your discard pile and play them again. Reanimator effects in Magic have been known for being sort of combo piece, but the reason why it's combo piece in Magic the Gathering is because reanimator effects are relatively cheap there, and they can reanimate units of any size. While here, it's specifically card that costs 6 or less or 8 or less. So it's there's limit on how you can use that. What do I think about this card? So basically, I think that in terms of um, uh, if you are just reanimating something that costs 6 or less, I don't think it's amazing because I mean it gives you the because obviously it's going to require you to have, it has a condition, right? And the condition is that you need to have a unit that costs 6 or less in your discard to be able to use that. And then the payoff is not big because you're just playing this card for the same price. If you, let's say you find a card that costs 6, you pay 6 to pay a card that costs 6. Not super amazing. Obviously, there are certain cards in matchup that you like to have multiple copies of. So let's say you're playing a matchup where you have a 6 drop that is particularly powerful, and you play Palpatine's Return. I think I'm mostly thinking about Ruthless Raider, which is a card that I think is amazing against control, and being able to reanimate a Ruthless Raider is great. But I think the main value of this card and really where this card shine is when it gets to reanimate things that are bigger than 6. So effectively 8 or 7 card units. So um, in this case, the two card that right now we are the most excited of reanimating with this card is going to be a Vader. So Vader that costs 7, or a Palpatine that costs 8. So this is where you get the most value out of this card. The thing is, it doesn't really allow you to play those cards earlier in the game, because for those cards to be in your discard pile, you need to have them being killed first. And obviously, if you haven't played them, it's very difficult. So obviously, there's probably going to be some way to discard those cards. I don't think there's any way, at least on the Imperial side, to actually place those big cards into your discard pile first before reanimating them. I think there's going to be some way to have discard outlet, I'm sure, but for now we don't really have that. But once we have that, then the card becomes a lot better because then you can play effectively your Palpatine one turn earlier, your Vader one turn earlier, or your Palpatine 2 turns earlier, which is pretty amazing. And obviously, as we get more big force unit, this card is going to get better and better and better. So, what is my thinking about this card? So, I think this card has huge potential, and I think it's only going to get stronger as time goes on. But right now, I see this as a sideboard card versus control. I think against control or in grindy matchup in general, the ability to not maybe as a sideboard card, you could also play the main deck as a one-of and then play more copies in the sideboard. And the idea is to effectively play multiple copies of Palpatine. So you're playing Palpatine already, you play Palpatine, Palpatine dies, you reanimate Palpatine, Palpatine comes back, or and multiple copies of Vader. So this is really where I see this card being very powerful. So far, I rated this card at 8 out of 10. I think right now, if this card was like printed right now, Spark of Rebellion, it would probably be like a 7 or a 6 out of 10. But I think the potential for the future of this card, the ability to discard cards and then play them back with Palpatine, to be able to play them earlier than is very powerful. And for this reason, I rate this card 8 out of 10. Next, we got the Grey Squadron Y-Wing, which a lot of people have been very excited about because the card is basically looks like an A-Wing that is playable in any Rebel deck. But in my opinion, it is not even close to that. And the reason is because your opponent gets to choose where the damage goes. And any cards where your opponent gets to choose where the damage, where you give the choice to the opponent, tend to not see any play. We've seen that, for example, with I Have No Choice. The 7 resource card, which are card very powerful in theory, but because the opponent gets to choose which effect goes where, it's a lot weaker. I Am Your Father is also a card that saw very little play, despite being in the game from the very beginning, even before we saw any other card. One of the first card that was revealed, even then, when very few cards were revealed, it was a card that saw very little play, and that's because giving opponent the choice is always terrible. And I don't think, and Grey Squadron is no exception to that. The problem is that if your opponent has a unit in play, like a Battlefield Marine, and you attack with Y-Wing, you're going to take the 2 damage on your Y-Wing and take 1 damage to base. So if you want to be aggressive with this card, it's simply not going to deal the damage that you want it to deal compared to an A-Wing or even compared to an X-Wing. In my opinion, I would rather be dealing 1 less damage. So my comparison, a lot of people have been comparing with this card with X-Wing, and a lot of people are saying that Y-Wing is better than X-Wing. And I completely disagree with that. I think you would rather have 2 damage and you know where those damage is going, rather than having deal 1 more damage but not being able to decide where the damage is going. For me, it is clear as crystal. This unit is never be able to kill anything, any units, because your opponent will always choose the 2 damage goes on the base, and your Y-Wing won't be able to kill the unit. So Y-Wing is always going to go for the base, and then the 2 damage, you hope that it's going to go on something that's going to be useful, but most likely your opponent will just put it on something that is kind of irrelevant. And once again, the fact that your opponent always has the option to choose makes the Y-Wing particularly weak. So in my opinion, I don't think this card is very playable. I give it a 2 out of 10. It is Rebel, it is a Rebel in space, but I would rather be playing. I think X-Wing is a better card than this. So I give it a 2 out of 10, maybe because in draft maybe it's not bad, but in constructed I would rather be playing X-Wing. I would rather be dealing 1 less damage and be able to choose where that damage goes. Next we got Kylo Ren. Okay, Kylo Ren, I'm actually very excited for this leader. He's the first real aggro villainy leader that we had. So we had obviously IG-88, but fortunately not very playable. Kylo Ren is really super aggro. The ability to give +2 attack to unit for free is very powerful potentially. Yes, you have to discard a card from your hand, but obviously if you are if you're building a deck where discarding cards is going to be sort of an engine that allows you to trigger powerful effect, like card that basically gives bonus when cards are discarded, I can see this ability being very powerful. I think this card is powerful, looks very weak on paper, but it has potential to be so strong, given the right circumstances. I've been playing enough Magic to know that discarding a card can often be an upside rather than a downside. We already talked earlier about the Palpatine's return. Now you have a built-in discard effect. I don't necessarily think that you want to play Palpatine in Kylo Ren's deck. I think Kylo Ren really wants to play very low to the ground. So I don't necessarily think that Kylo Ren is going to be wanting to have those kind of expensive events as well as playing those expensive units to reanimate with. But I think that we're going to get plenty of effect that's going to synergize with this card. Is it going to be in this set or is it going to be in an upcoming set? Who knows, but that's eventually going to be a thing. So Leader's ability, very powerful. The unit, 5/4 for 4, is very powerful. Yes, 4 health is a bit easy to deal with, but 5 attack is a lot. Unfortunately, Kylo Ren is very rarely going to have 5 attack, because obviously it gets weaker as your hands get smaller. I think Kylo Ren is one of those leaders where the ability might not be the leader unit might not be very good, but I think the ability is strong enough to make up for that. and I could be wrong about that. So we'll see how that goes. So far, I give it a 4 out of 10. Unfortunately, it's hard to tell if there's going to be enough support for this card to see any play in this set. But it is a card that has potential for the future. Right now, obviously, without any sort of support, this card is obviously abysmal. It's terrible. But I think it has potential for the future, so I give it a 4 out of 10. Then we got Rickety Quadjumper. This card is a little bit awkward because it wants you to play a lot of non-unit in your deck in order to trigger the ability often. But in the meantime, it's a unit itself, and it also requires another unit to be on the battlefield to be able to give an experience token to, because it cannot give experience to itself, which in my opinion is a big problem. Obviously terrible stats and no immediate impact on the game. You have to wait for it to attack to actually trigger the effect. All those things makes this card pretty mediocre. It's slow. It's a little bit awkward to use. So yeah, not a big fan of the card. 2 out of 10. Then we got Kylo's Tide Silencer. So a lot of people were very pleased to see that the TIE Silencer was much better than the leader, and it is the third legendary card of this deck, and this one is going to be an expensive one because it's going to see play in a lot of decks. The reason why this card is going to be played in a lot of decks is because it fills a particular need that the villainy players have been asking forever, which is a good 2-drop in space. Basically, 3-2 for 2 is an excellent stat line in space because it means you can kill A-Wings without dying. It means you can trade with any other early game space unit. You can trade with the Red 3. You can trade with the X-Wing. You can trade with so many things. Another reason why, by the way, to play X-Wing over Y-Wing is that Y-Wing will die to this thing, and Kylo will Silencer will survive while an X-Wing will actually trade. So yeah, so just even ignoring the text, just simply be a 3-2 for 2 in space by itself makes the card very playable, and I think this card is going to see a lot of play. It's a great card, for example, in Vader that really desperately needed to have some sort of space unit in the early stages of the game. It's going to be great in aggro deck, of course, because then we're talking about a 3-attack unit in space. That's very good as well. So I think it's very good. Another cool thing about this card is that if you discarded it from your hand, you get to play it and play it. So this effect is basically for Kylo Ren, so not a very powerful effect. Only a very few decks are going to care about this effect. But if you do, then it's another additional upside. So I rate this card at 8 out of 10. Maybe it's a 9 out of 10. It's a little bit difficult to predict whether 3-2 is going to be a good stat line in space in this new expansion. If this card was released in Spark of Rebellion, I would rate this card a 9 out of 10 because it really feels a need for the villainy decks that is huge. But it's hard to predict whether this is going to be the case in Shadow of the Galaxy with a card pool that's going to double in size. We don't know if a 3-2 for 2 is going to be as strong in this new upcoming set. So I'm being a little bit cautious here and giving it an 8 out of 10, but I think I would rate this card a 9 out of 10 if it was released in Spark of Rebellion for sure. Next we got Nema, Outpost Constables, and I like this card. We've seen a lot of people, not a lot of people, but a few people play base Malbus, and the reason why people play base Malbus is because it's a 2/6 for 4 Sentinel. But it's only Sentinel when you have the initiative. It's a 2/5, sorry, 2/5. It does have Grit, which is kind of cool with the Sentinel units, but the Sentinel is not guaranteed and it only has 5 health. This card feel the same need. It's a 2/6, it always has Sentinel, and it has +1 HP. So for me, this card is for anybody who is basically going to be looking for a big Sentinel unit that, on the curve 4 and cannot play Charleston. If you cannot play Charleston, I think this card is a reasonable alternative, and it is, in my opinion, probably better than base Malbus at this very purpose. Base Malbus, of course, a bit better in the Grand Inquisitor kind of shenanigan thing, but in any other circumstances, I would probably play a Nema, which I think does a better job, more reliable, because it has Sentinels all the time. So I could be wrong about this, but for now I rate this card 4 out of 10. I still think it's going to be very niche, but I think it is playable. Moving on, we have give it to your hanger. So this card to your hanger. So this card does two things. The first thing is dealing 1 damage to enemy unit, to any unit. So that's very versatile. Just 1 damage to any enemy unit. And the other is to force that unit to be able to attack you, and it has to prioritize attacking units. So I'm actually more excited about the 1 damage ping than the ability. I think the ability is basically kind of a way worse exhaust effect. There are going to be situations in which it's going to be powerful, but in a lot of cases it's just going to be a way worse version of an exhaust effect. And we already have seen a 1 resources exhaust effect in this set, which I think is a very good card, but it's not like and this card is kind of worse than this, but it has the 1 damage thing, which is kind of neat. If we are in a meta where pings are very powerful, the ability to counter ping an enemy unit can be very valuable. But remember, we have a card that does this. It's called forgot the name. The 1/3 I forgot the name. So basically, we already have a unit. It's a villainy cunning unit, a 1/3 for 1 that comes into play. You reveal an event from your hand, deal 1 damage to any unit. While this card does the same thing and gives you a 1/3 on top of the damage dealt. While this card deals 1 damage but doesn't really give you anything else outside of the effect itself. In my opinion, this card is quite weak. I give it a 4 out of 10. I give it the benefit of the doubt unless there's like some crazy combo that I've kind of overlooked. But it's probably lower than this. It's probably going to be like a 2 out of 10. If this 1/3 guy doesn't see a lot of play, I don't see this seeing any more plays. So I give it a 4 out of 10, and honestly, I think it's very generous. I think I probably should have rated this a 3 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10. Then we got Kira. Kira is basically a regional governor, but a big one. She costs 2 more resources, which is a lot, but she has a lot of advantages. First of all, she's a 3/5 instead of 1/4, much more difficult to kill, and actually has a bigger impact on the game as she stays in play. She stays in play. And the other advantage is that she can look at the opponent hand as you basically name the card, which means that you are guaranteed to find a card that you want to name. Because you are seeing the opponent's hand at the same time as you play the card. Making a card cost 3 more is honestly as good as preventing that card from being played, because 3 more is such a massive tax to pay. It's incredibly expensive. So it's almost as good as just removing preventing that card from being played as long as she's in play. It's really, honestly, there's no really much difference between the card not being able to be played at all and the card being able to be played, but only at the cost of paying 3 extra. So is Kira better? I don't think she's necessarily better than Regional Governor. Regional Governor costing only 2 is kind of a big deal. But obviously she's in a different color combination. She's playable in Cunning, Heroism. So for example, for me this card is going to be great addition to Han, because you can pull it out of viewing reinforcement. And obviously when you play her for 4, you get a 3/5 instead of 1/4. So for Han, I think she's a very good addition. So we'll see how much she sees play. I rated this card as 7 out of 10 because Regional Governor is a card that sees a lot of play, and I see this card being very similarly playable. It's also a card that, at the very least, it's going to be a card that's going to see a lot of play in the sideboard. So I think it's an excellent card. Right now we are kind of in a realm where Heroism Cunning is not in a very good place in Spark of Rebellion, but I think this color combination is going to become a lot better with Shadow of the Galaxy for sure. Next we got a new adventure. This card is great. It is what we called in a blink effect, which is basically the idea of returning a card into your hand and playing it back immediately. And this card basically blinks any card that costs 6 or less and put it back in. And 6 or less really covers most units in the game, so it's really not that big of a restriction. Cannot blink leader, obviously. And the fact that you get to replay the unit for free right away is very nice. So there's basically two purposes for this card. The first one is to heal a unit. Basically, it heals any unit back to its full health, which is very nice. But the other effect that it allows you in is to basically re-trigger any when played effect. And there's quite a few cards in the game that have powerful when play effect, and especially in cunning. So in this case, we got obviously blinking, a counting out bouncer. So that's basically this card becomes a two resources waylay. You can use it on forgot the name. On the body rook. So that's basically this card becomes a sort of a spark of rebellion. You can use it to I think one of the one where I'm the most excited about this card is on forgot the name bounty hunter crew. So you basically blink a bounty hunter crew, and you can get an event back into your hand, and that event can be a new adventure. So there's actually a potential infinite loop with that, where you play the Cantina Bouncer. Uh, Earlier, you play new adventure on the Cantina Bouncer. You get back, you blink the Cantina Bouncer, you get back new adventure. You play a new adventure again, you get it back. And I mean, it's not infinite because you gotta pay 2 every time you do this. But then, if you have another effect that, let's say, allows you to untap 3 resources every time a unit comes into battlefield, and suddenly you got infinite resource. So there's like a potential loop here that can be interesting to exploit. That I think makes this card very interesting in terms of potential, what it can, the sort of combos that you can do for free for this kind of with this kind of card. So I think this card is pretty cool. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. So I rated this card a 8 out of 10. So why do I not give this card a higher score? First of all, it is fairly situational. You do need to have a unit with a when play effect for this card to be usable. And you also need to be playing double cunning. The card for 4 becomes a lot less attractive. So for now, I give this card an 8 out of 10. Maybe obviously you need to really build around the card for that card to be good. But if you can, then the card is very solid. Then we got Rey, more than a scavenger. So this is like kind of a leader, is in my opinion fairly similar to Tarkin, as she has this ability to give experience token for 1 resources and as an action. And she comes into play once again, just like Tarkin. She's a very low attack, high health unit. But she's only a 2/6, while Tarkin is a 2/7, and Tarkin comes into play at 5, while Rey comes into play at 6. To make up for that, Rey does have Restore 3. Another thing that Rey has going for her is that she's a Force leader, which, as you know, is a very important keyword, and she also has the ability to give the experience token to herself, as opposed to Tarkin, who has to give it into another experience unit. So the condition is also different. Tarkin Imperial here, 2 or less power. So yeah, so she can attack and give a token to herself. So at first, I was pretty underwhelmed with the card, thinking that it was just a worse version of Tarkin. After thinking a little bit more about it, I realized that the ability for her to give the token to herself is actually quite good. So coming at 3/7 for 6 with a Restore 3 is not bad. With all that being said, I think this card is a little bit too slow and quote unquote fair for constructed. I don't think she's going to be constructed playable. I don't think she's going to see any plane constructed. For the exact same reason as Tarkin. Tarkin is powerful, yes, but slow and very like kind of very very slow. And Rey has the same issues, in my opinion. So for me, I'm gonna rate this 3 out of 10, and I think this card is gonna be quite good in draft. I think in draft she's gonna be good, but in constructed she's gonna be bad. You might be surprised that I rated Rey lower than Kylo, and the reason is because I think Kylo has a lot more potential than Rey. Kylo has the potential um, to be in this kind of a discard engine and be like really a powerhouse in that kind of particular deck, even though he's going to need a lot of help to get there. But Rey, I don't see any context in which that would basically make her playable. Even if your entire deck is made out of unit with 2 or less power, um, first of all, having 2 or less power is a kind of a steeper condition than being Imperial, and not only that, um, Yeah, so yeah, she's just very slow. So my opinion is that she's a 3 out of 10, and I give it the 3 points for being potentially quite good in draft. Next we got Adelphi Patrol Wing, and I think this card is quite decent. Really good stat for the price, immediate impact on the game, and the effect is pretty powerful, being able to attack with a unit, and also giving that unit +2 attack if you have the initiative. So it's kind of like a big fleet lieutenant, but Fleet Lieutenant only works on the rebels, and as we are getting more sets and less amount of rebels in terms of proportion of cards, I feel like Fleet Lieutenant is going to get a lot worse, especially with Shadow of the Galaxy. While Adel Patrol Wing is potentially kind of universally playable, even if you don't get the +2 attack bonus, being able to put a big body on the board and attack with a unit in order to be able to claim the initiative next turn faster, I think has value. And you're also going to get the +2 attack relatively often. So I think it's quite good. It's not like spectacular, but it's quite good. The 4/6 stat line is in space is pretty good. I give this card a 6 out of 10. I don't think it's like amazing, but I think it's a very solid card, and it's probably going to see play quite a bit in constructed. Next we got Dameron. So a lot of people lost their mind on this card, saying, "Well, this card is amazing. It's absolutely incredible." But there's a couple of, so I'm gonna first of all I'm gonna say why people are losing their mind over this card. It is a 6/6/5, so stat lines are pretty excellent for the price, um, and the on attack ability is very flexible. Being able to deal 2 damage to base, defeat an upgrade, or opponent making discard a card means that this effect is useful in a wide amount of different decks. And that also means that if you play this card with Energy Conversion Lab, you can attack with a 6/6 and deal 2 damage to your unit on base, meaning you can deal 8 damage to a single target. And obviously this is obviously directly compared to Steadfast Battalion, who can deal 7 damage to a single unit by attacking with it. And this card can kind of do the same thing by dealing 8. But you do have to discard a card for this, which Battalion doesn't need to. But Battalion needs to have a leader in play to be able to be playable. So that's the thing. And obviously very flexible, can also defeat upgrades. And also, if you're playing against a control deck, the ability to discard card also very useful. So there's a lot of cool thing going on with this card. So the flexibility is, but let me put a couple of caveat into this. The first caveat that I have with Podarmon is the fact that it's once again is a 5 drop that doesn't have an immediate impact on the board. And that means that to really get the best out of Poe, you're going to have to combine it with something that can give it something ambush, and preferably energy conversion lab. So that's something. It's very dependent on energy conversion lab, and as opposed to the Steadfast Battalion, which is in the same color as ECL, Podarmon is not in the same color. That means that you really have to be specifically playing green, red, white to be able to get the best out of Poe, and that's kind of a bummer. That's a very limiting factor for him. Another thing that has to be taken into account is that uh, you have to discard cards to really benefit from his effect. He needs to attack to get the effect, and you really need to discard cards to benefit from the effect. And that is also a very significant cost, because obviously those effects, while pretty decent, they're not as powerful as the card that you're discarding from. You probably would get more value by simply playing those cards. Obviously, those effects do trigger for free, so it's something to keep in mind. So there's two pretty big conditions for Poe Diamond to be good. The first condition is you kind of need ECL. I don't think this card is going to be nearly as good without ECL, so you kind of need to play green, and you also need to have some sort of ways to draw cards, because discarding your entire hand for those effects and basically putting yourself on top deck mode, that's not necessarily going to be worth it, and you need to have some sort of way to refill your hand. So I really, really love that card because it's not good in everything. It's not going to be an auto include in any red white deck, but it's going to enable new kind of decks to be playable. I'm mostly thinking about Cassian. Cassian Green is going to love that card because this card does everything Cassian wants, and Cassian has this built-in draw effect that allows you to redraw cards and Cassian can play Energy Conversion Lab and plays the right colors. So I think this card is going to be very exciting in Cassian. I also think that Han Red might be interesting in a card like this. Han though does not like discarding cards though, because it already has does card disadvantage with its ability. So it's a great card, but it's not going to see play everywhere, and that's why I give it a 7 out of 10. I know I'm going to get flack for this because a lot of people are losing their mind over this card. Yes, the ability of this card to kill, to ambush and kill a 8 health unit is amazing. Yes, it is very flexible with the discard and discard upgrade. Yes, the stats are amazing, but I think it really requires a specific deck to work. Um, it's not like good in any deck, like for example Status Battalion is, in my opinion. But obviously in a deck where it's good, it's going to be much better than Status Battalion, that's for sure. Next we got Mix Mayfield. So this guy is has a pretty cool effect. Deal 2 damage every time your opponent discard a card is kind of nice. But there's two things that really makes me sad about this card. The first thing is the stats. This card is as this really want to stay on in a game to be good, and the problem is with a 2/2 for 2 stat line is never gonna stay in play very long. Nobody is gonna let that guy in play for more than 1 or 2 turns. It's just gonna be so easy to kill. That's the first thing that makes me sad. The second thing is that his ability is only once per round. And that limitation means that even if you're trying to set up like a big turn, where you're trying to make your opponent discard multiple cards at once, or you have a card that can discard multiple cards at once, even in that context, Mayfield is never going to deal more than 2 damage. So basically, the 2/2 means that you really have to be playing it in a kind of a combo setup to really make it work. And even if that combo setup, it's going to be limited by the fact that it can only trigger once per round. So those two limitations combined make this card pretty terrible. I give it a 3 out of 10, giving it the benefit of the doubt. And it would have been really cool to have this card being an enabler, a really great payoff for discard deck. Unfortunately, that is not the payoff that we're looking for. It's really a weak payoff and a very fragile payoff, unfortunately. Next, we got Bazine and Tal. So this card is very interesting. It is basically the Spark of Rebellion for villainy. Obviously, the downside is that the opponent gets to draw a card after the card is discarded, and also, but you do get a 1/3 body, and it does have smuggle. So what to think about this? So I think Spark of Rebellion is going to be more useful universally. Like, there's no matchup in which Spark of Rebellion is truly bad, because at the end of the day, the card is always removed forever. While Base Nithal is more of an anti kind of is going to be useful when there's a specific card that you want to get rid of. So obviously she's going to be very strong against combo decks, but combo decks yet do not really exist. So now it's really going to be matchup dependent. Obviously, against ramp decks, you manage to play her on turn 1, you're going to be being able to discard ramp with this card is going to be super useful. If you're playing against control, being able to get rid of Super Laser Blast is going to be very useful. So she can still do things like this, but that makes her a lot more situational than Spark of Rebellion. So while Spark of Rebellion is a card I can easily play in the main deck, Bazine Nithal, there's going to be a lot of times where you're just going to play her, going to discard a random card, opponent is going to draw another card, and her impact is not going to be super important and super powerful. So she has more of this kind of like randomness to her that kind of Spark of Rebellion give you that guarantee value, where she's kind of like, yeah, sometimes she's just going to be discarding something a bit mild, and then since the opponent gets to draw the card, then it's basically just putting like a 1/3 for 2 into play. So the body is going to be pretty much irrelevant in most matchup. 1/3 is a very bad body. Unless you're playing against control, then it can absorb power of the dark side. So I think it's a powerful sideboard card versus control. I don't think this card is going to see main deck play. I could be wrong, but I don't think this is a card that's going to see like a 3 of in the main deck. If it sees plays in the main deck, it's going to be as a 1 or 2 of. The fact that smuggle is also kind of a big deal. Having that options available to you is going to be interesting. So I give this card a 7 out of 10. I think it's quite good. I don't think it's quite on the same level as Spark of Rebellion, but I think it's going to be a solid sideboard card at the very least. So pretty cool. Next, I think this is the last card for today, is Coruscant Dissident. And this card is a little bit underwhelming. 3443 is decent, but we've seen other 3443 in the game that have more powerful abilities than her. Mostly, of course, talking about Ezra Bridger. I think Ezra Bridger is basically strictly better than her. Uh, our ability to on attack to radio resource is very weak because generally speaking in Star Wars Unlimited you want to be attacking, you want first to attack with your units and then play your cards after. Very rarely do you do the other way around. So that means that by the time you want to attack with the dissident, you're not going to have any exhausted resources, meaning the ready effect is not going to come into play. And even if it does, the likelihood of this actually mattering is kind of a big deal. So as a 3-5, I would have been excited about the card. As a 3-4, it is very underwhelming. I give it a 2 out of 10 because it's probably decent in draft, even though it's pretty committal because it's a double aspect requirement. But yeah, for me it's a 2 out of 10. So a lot of exciting cards today. A lot of I think potentially very powerful. I think the most powerful card that we've seen today is probably the silencer. Um, yeah, the silencer is probably the one I'm the most excited about out of the card we've seen today. And out of the but my favorite card is Poe Dameron. I think in terms of like card that I'm exciting to play with, Poe Dameron is definitely up in the list. Not only because I think the card is very cool, but also because it's gonna make Cassian playable, and that makes me excited. I'm excited to try to build a Cassian deck around Poe Dameron. Once again, we are kind of continuing on this trend of underwhelming leaders. Like I'm still struggling to rate any leaders in this set above 5. It's just a little bit weird. So I really hope to be wrong on how I evaluate those leaders. But for now, I haven't found any leaders that is really breaking the bank and really gonna see when I can confidently say 100% that this card is gonna see playing constructed. Like it's a bit tough. Anyway, thank you again for following that video. As usual, my coaching schedule in the description below, and I'll see you next time.